Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. I'm here today with one of our favourite authors, RamV. How are you, mate?
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure to have you on, Ram. What can you tell us about the collection of your first, the Swamp Thing arc, Becoming?
When I first approached DC about doing something new for them, this was during the discussions where 5G was being talked about, and I was presented with a list of characters, and they said, "What are you interested in reinventing? What are you interested in picking up?" And I said, "Yeah, you don't need to give me a list. I want to write a Swamp Thing book." I pitched the idea of moving on from Alec Holland and picking up a new host, and the idea of getting into the nitty gritties of the body horror involved in a human transforming into a plant elemental, if you will, was always of interest. And then the greater philosophical leanings of what we're doing to this planet, and how that can be embodied in like the breakdown of a person's relationship with their surroundings. I think those are all things of interest and that were in the pitch. DC looked at it, they loved it. We started working on the book, and here we are. People seem to have really enjoyed the run. I'm glad that everything we tried to pull off in this book, we were able to. It looks like it made it out onto the page from our heads.
So now that it's in a collected form,
Yeah.
what can you tell me without too many spoilers about the specific arc in this first collection?
Yeah, I think the first collection collects the first 4 issues, and 2 issues of the Future State story that I did with Mike Perkins as well. The 4 issues of the Becoming essentially look at a new avatar, a new host for the Swamp Thing, which has been a concept that has been teased before in other stories in the DCU, but I don't think anyone quite did anything with that other than a Neil Gaiman one-shot, I think. And so this first 4 issues really looks at what it's like to be an ordinary human being suddenly upon whom these powers and this responsibility is suddenly thrust upon, and it isn't a nice thing. It isn't like being bestowed with a gift. There is inherent trauma involved. There is inherent horror involved, and so I found that to be very interesting, and hopefully this opening arc kind of encompasses that idea that even though you're turning into a superhero, if you will, it's not a very nice process to go through.
And of course, yeah, I mean, turning into the Swamp Thing is somewhat different to turning into Superman, for example.
Yeah, of course. And I remember discussing this with someone else. Page 1 opens with a doctor describing the life cycle of a blowfly that goes from being a maggot to a fly, feasting on dead tissue. And so I think the idea of that transformation of going through a life cycle where you're turning from becoming another thing is kind of coded into that first page. So I think that first page is pretty much a manifesto for what the rest of the book entails.
No, I think you're right. And how did your art team come together on this book, mate?
Mike was already discussing working on a Swamp Thing idea over at DC, and I think they had offered him a couple of different Swamp Thing books, and once he had read the pitch and read the ideas, he was like, "Look, I want to work on this series." So he and I were put in touch, and my first interaction with Mike, I knew that he was going to be perfect because, at least with this run, I knew I was trying to do something that tied in all of the history of Swamp Thing. Like it wouldn't be something that denied its own past, if you will, the book.
Yeah.
And just talking to Mike, you get this idea that as if he knows all the versions of Swamp Thing that have ever existed in the DCU. So this is a man who is intimately familiar with the character's history, not only as a reader, but as an artist. Like his hand understands the difference between a beset Swamp Thing and a total bend Swamp Thing and a Vage Swamp Thing and a Moore Swamp Thing, you know. And so I found that to be tremendous. And then ever since then, kind of working with Mike, I have a huge amount of respect for what he does. He absolutely nails the tone and tenor of what I'm trying to do each time, and he brings his own influences to the book. It wouldn't be the same thing without Mike. And then Mike Spicer, Mike and I kind of talked our editors into like, get this guy, because I think Mike's got a coloring sense, which is it takes the art into consideration in very interesting ways. He's not a standard, I put down flats, I'm going to put in some colors kind of colorist. He understands what the art needs. And so it's been great having him. I think his work on the series has been tremendous. And then it was the same with Aditya Bidikar, the letterer. I went to the editors and I said, can I get Aditya? Because he and I have worked on so many books before. We have this kind of shorthand. Sometimes I want to pull off weird little tricks where Levi's human caption boxes are transforming into Swamp Thing's caption boxes on the page. And I know Aditya's capable of pulling off stuff like that. So yeah, it's been great. It's like working with the Beatles.
Yeah, well, that's what it looks like from the outside. I mean, it's quite clear that you're on such great harmony with each other. I find the artwork very, but it's very. I'm glad you talked about the colours, because it's very rich and it's very propulsive, and and sometimes, as you say, there are things on the page that I think you're delivering visual concepts in ways that I still find fresh and surprising. That's after a lifetime of reading comics. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something I know we wanted to do, and is part of my strengths and Mike's strengths. And so I wanted the kind of collaboration where I could go like, I know you've drawn 50 comics, Mike, but I've got this weird looking page in my head. I'm gonna draw a terrible stick figure sketch of what it looks like, and hopefully it'll make sense to you. And Mike's the kind of guy who'll be like, yeah, bring it on, bring on all the weird new ideas you've got. So
and that's the very essence of creative collaboration. Before you go, Ram, previous iterations of Swamp Thing, what's your favorite?
I think the Moore run is by far the most influential for me, because I got into comics reading Vertigo books essentially, and I think it was the first thing that I read by Moore, even before I read Watchmen. So that was quite influential. But I think there have also been great runs from Rick Veitch right after Moore, who did some interesting stuff there. The Tom King one shot was great. Neil Gaiman's done a couple of one shots with Swamp Thing that I thought were pretty good. And then I think the Snyder Soule stuff really expanded on the lore, although it was more overtly superhero and less of the sort of horror and the DCU thing. I think that lore that was built during those two runs has been interesting to take back and go like, okay, what does this philosophically mean? You know? So I think there were quite a few influential runs, but probably the one that is imprinted in my mind when I think of Swamp Thing is Alan Moore.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. I always really remember, I think the one that really sticks in my mind, maybe it's his second annual, it's the one where Swamp Thing goes down into hell.
Yeah.
I think that's just an amazing piece of comics. But honestly, without any flattery, mate, I think what you guys are doing on this current iteration, it literally stands side by side with that. I think it's the best Swamp Thing's been for a long time, and all those gentlemen that you mentioned are awesome. Yeah, but I think the run you guys are doing is inspired. So thanks for coming and talking to us about Becoming, which everybody watching this can buy Volume 1 from the links attached to this conversation. Thanks, brother.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, and thanks for saying that. It is the highest praise.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.